7 p.m., so I'll call the meeting to order. A meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee was held today, Tuesday, October 18th at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr., Chairman.
Present.
Alderman at Large Michael B. O'Brien Sr., Vice Chair.
Present.
Alderman June M. Karen.
Here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tebow is also here. We also have Alderman Ernest Jetty and Director of a couple of things, Tim Cummings and Amy DeRoche from Economic Development.
All right, and so public comment. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on what we're going to talk about tonight? All right, seeing no one. Discussion. Acting Administrative Services Director Cummings, can you please join us? And if memory serves me correct, we've tasked you with finding out how the business community of downtown restaurants would like to go about paying for fees.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. For the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development and Interim Administrative Services Director. And at your, I want to say, meeting of September 20th, I was before you for what was the start of a conversation of essentially charging of a fee for the extended outdoor dining. And I had outlined some ideas and some suggestions and give you a little background context at that meeting. I believe it was decided that we would have this additional meeting to continue that conversation. I would come back before you and tell you what I had discovered with my due diligence, and then ultimately, if there seemed to be consensus among this body, you would work towards filing a legislation that would formalize the charging of parking spaces for that extended outdoor dining. So with that being said, over the last couple of weeks, I have either walked Main Street or spoken to, I wouldn't say all of the restaurants and eateries, but a strong majority of them. And in fact, I just wrapped up this evening by hitting the last couple. And to get a sense as to what their appetite would be. All of them have expressed a willingness to pay. And in fact, they have affirmatively said they believe they should pay. But they have represented that they don't want to overpay or they want to pay their fair share. A couple have represented that they think it should be market-driven or research-based. A couple have suggested that the city gets additional monies through the meals tax that has come in higher and gets redistributed back to municipalities, and Nashua's portion has gone up, so they feel like maybe some of that money should cover some of the costs or expenses to this program in lieu of them being charged a fee. Most understood, though, that this was coming because it was part of the conversation that happened last spring. In the prior meeting, I had outlined what some other communities in our market are charging, somewhere in the range of between $1,000 to $500, and Lowell, Massachusetts doesn't charge anything. And this evening, after consulting with the various businesses, both on Main Street and on the side streets, and I'll note the businesses on the side streets did point out that maybe they shouldn't be paying as much, and I told them that would be a little complicated to administer, and I appreciated their entrepreneurialism, but nonetheless, I would think a recommendation is somewhere around $500 per space for the season is what I think would be an appropriate market-based approach that you could justify. I think that would be a good baseline to set for this year, and after you see participation, you can always revisit it to increase it or decrease it, but if I was to proceed, I would be very comfortable with $500 per space.
Thank you, Director. Have you done the math on how much that would turn for every parking spot?
I have not.
How many parking spots are there in use for outdoor dining?
I would have to I would have to go back and do that analysis. I don't know off the top of my head. I can say this, if the rationale is to see if you can get enough money to cover the cost of deploying and picking up the barriers to make this happen. I don't think that would actually cover the cost for both. Maybe you could cover the cost for one, but not for both. It's about $40,000-ish per season, somewhere between 20 and 25 to drop off, pick up in a season.
Thank you. And I think the last time we talked about this was one could offset the other, where the 500 per parking spot could offset taking them out and in, and maybe the meals tax picks up the lost revenue for the parking spaces. With that said, I should probably open it up to questions. Alderman Clemens, I almost said director. Wow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think I guess I would go with that recommendation. I think it would probably give us somewhere between 23 and 25,000, depending on how many spaces there are. Because I think, from what I remember correctly, it was like 45 or 50 spaces. So, so if it's 50 spaces, that's, you know, $500 a space. That's $25,000. What we have to remember is that we're not necessarily looking to cover our costs, but what we are looking for is participation in the program. We want skin in the game from those that are benefiting from the service. And I liken that to anything that we do, for example, and Alderman Karen can attest to this, in the Parks Department, when we charge a fee for somebody participating in basketball or participating in one of the youth sports or things like that, obviously the city covers most of the costs, but we have a participation fee and that covers a portion of it. This is sort of the same thing on an economic development scale. And so I would tend to think that the $500 would be a good approach. I would say, you know, $500 per space. I would hope that in the legislation, we could make sure that if there had to be 2 barriers on either end of, let's say somebody does 3 spaces, and then there's an extra 2 on either end because that's for safety, that we don't charge them for those, that's just kind of like on us, right? So because I just think that's fair. So anyway, those are my thoughts, but I'm happy to hear what the rest of the committee thinks.
Alderman Cleve, then Alderman Karen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, and I'm glad that Alderman Clemens had brought that up because that was one of my concerns. I didn't want them to be charged for it. But my other concern is there were times when we talked about this from last year to this year, and we had to create certain barriers because of the way the road was. We couldn't say, well, this one, we're going to block off these 2 parking spaces, then the next place doesn't have anything. So we couldn't do this in and out. We actually had to more or less kind of created that. Are we going to have an issue if maybe only 3 restaurants want 2 on one side and 1 on the other side? Is this going to become an issue with trying to define the road without creating this in and out?
If I may, Mr.
Yeah, go
Chairman.
ahead, Director.
That is one of my biggest concerns with going through this exercise is you're gonna have some members of the public who are going to say, oh, well, they're not taking advantage of it now, then therefore you don't necessarily need to put out the barriers. And that may be true in that limited circumstance, but it also is true that from a public safety standpoint, we may not, and it's case by case, and I'll give you an example. I think if you were to look at, and I don't want to pick on this restaurant because I have no idea whether they're going to do it or not, but Main Street Gyro. So Joanne's Kitchen opted after the start of this to actually have the barriers removed, and they wanted the parking. We worked through that issue. That actually created Main Street Gyro to be the end cap, if you will. Now, next year, the same condition arose, and they said, we aren't interested. You could safely probably eliminate those barriers, which would open up the parking spaces. But if you were to suddenly go further down Main Street into one of the other areas, again, using an example like the Mexican restaurant right next to O'Brien's, because of how that road is laid out, if one of those restaurants suddenly didn't decide to participate, you may still need to keep the barriers up because you wouldn't be able to have that type of gap or opening because it would cause a public safety issue. So we would need to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. I would want to stress, though, that we would be trying to minimize any type of changes because we have gone through this conversation at length. And so we want to really kind of consider this settled for the most part, but we would obviously look at that.
Follow up? Thank you. Then I would like to make a recommendation to this committee. I know I'm not on it, but that when you're thinking about that perhaps maybe have to keep the same flow that we have going, but if someone wants to use it, they have to pay to use it. Just as a recommendation, idea, just, kind of keep the flow. My fear is that we're gonna create this. It was one thing to do it around where Wingate was, because that's kind of where it started. So people weren't used to it there, but if you started doing it over by where the surf was too much in that way, we could end up having, or on the other side, we could have some more issues. So just comment is all I wanted to make on that. Thank you.
And I wonder if I got you right out to Alderman Karen, putting in the ordinance that, that space is still there, not to be used unless they pay, of course, and then, if there's an enforceable action, if someone does try to use it unbeknownst to the city. So.
Yeah, understood. I believe, at least my conversations have always been with the groups, as I've spoken to them over the last couple of weeks, is you'd only be able to use the space if you pay for it. There may be some additional barriers put up for public safety reasons that you're not able to do outdoor dining in, and you're not paying for that, but they still need to be up, as Alderman Clemens had mentioned. Like, there's some areas where you need to kind of round out the road or square off the road more specifically. But those areas you wouldn't necessarily charge the restaurant, and on the flip side, the restaurant shouldn't have any expectation that they would be able to use it.
Alderman Karen and Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment, because I was thinking of that as well. I think that there should be a fee for this, but I do have some questions. I'm not sure if you have them, but I figured out how many spaces that we have taken up, to put the barriers. The other thing is, do you know how much the loss revenue on parking is approximately? Because it does affect the money that we give to the downtown when we total up that. So that would be a nice, something that we should have to make that, if you have a estimate.
We
that's
do.
fine.
I just
Okay.
don't have it at my fingertips. We do have that analysis done, and I can look it up for you and get it for you.
Okay, that, since I wasn't here at
And
the beginning.
I believe he gave it to us at the last meeting, but I also don't recall.
I didn't have it,
I know,
for some reason I didn't have it.
I want to jump over there and grab my notes.
Okay, you do. The other part of this, in your conversations with all of these restaurants, is everyone in favor of having the barriers and putting up the tables outside? Or are there some that you didn't expect might change their mind and not necessarily want them?
I would
You
say.
don't have to tell me who they are, it's,
Yeah, the preponderance of restaurants I've spoken to are interested, and more often than not, they've expressed a desire to enhance what they've done with spending more money out there now that they know or they believe that they're going to be doing this for a couple of years. For an example, earlier today I spoke to Casey McGee's. Casey McGee said, you know what, I'm doing this, I love it, it makes sense. I am actually going to spend additional money this coming season to make it even better for my restaurant, for my customers that come to this restaurant. And I said, okay, thank you. Now, with that being said, I also got, not as much, but some of the more sophisticated business folks said, well, I'm not gonna do it if it's too much. You know, it has to be reasonable, it has to be grounded with logic, and if it is, then yes, we absolutely want to participate. But if you're telling me you're going to do something like what Boston did and it's $10,000 per space, then no, we're not doing this. But if it's reasonable and well thought out, and you can justify the fee that is being charged, we believe we should be paying something. That was the type of responses I got.
Follow up, okay, so with those restaurants that are already participating, what about some of the others that were not participating? Did they think that this is something that they would want to do? And then I'll make a. I know we
So
have
I did
some
not actively engage the ones that aren't participating because this is gonna be a fee and,
Okay.
and I would say for the most part, most of them are participating. I would say so I would say that there's only really one or two. One, Tail Spinner's Side Street had some differing issues that constrained them this year because they really are just getting up and running and they missed the boat. Joanne's Kitchen, I don't necessarily know if they didn't want to participate or because of all the construction that was happening around them, they didn't necessarily see the value in it this year. But other than those two restaurants, you know, I'm not aware of restaurants that didn't participate.
Flight Center.
What's that?
Flight Center
Flight Center had,
did not.
had the, and they had their sidewalk seating, which they were very
Right.
comfortable with, but that rationale was labor-driven, you know, that was, you know,
that's-
they needed to make sure they could service the tables that they had, they couldn't service additional tables. But for the most part, you know, it's been well-received.
Okay. Follow up. So, I have had mixed feelings about this for a long time, get pros and cons and everything. I think it's important that the restaurants, if they're gonna participate, that there be a fee. It doesn't have to be way out there. It should be something that either helps pay for us to put the barriers up, helps for whatever else. It doesn't have to be total. I can't see us paying $10,000. That would be ridiculous. But I think that for the first year, if, let's say, we go with Alderman Clemens' idea of $500, then it's something that you can look at down the road. You don't want to put people out of business, but you certainly need to make them understand that it isn't for nothing. You know, during COVID, it was important that we helped our businesses all the way around. The other thing is, don't expect the state to give you any more money from meals and taxes. That ain't happening. Reps, right? Because that just doesn't happen. Yeah, well, if they give you a little bit. But I think that if you, for all those people that are very negative about this, I don't know if you'll ever sell this to them, no matter what you do. But you've got to find a balance so that people who want to eat outside in the summertime can do that, and the restaurants that want to participate can do that, but have an obligation to the city. And yes, there should be a consequence if someone, because you have to keep that barrier up, decides to put up tables on a space that they really haven't paid for. So it's a balancing act, and I think that, I think you can do that, working with the downtown, but I think the downtown committee has to also know that revenues will change because of the loss of parking spaces. And someone did ask me, why don't we do head-in parking downtown? Because that would give us more parking spaces, but that's for another day for infrastructure. But
Alderman Karen, I don't know if Director Cummings wants to respond to that.
no, he doesn't have to.
Okay.
Not now.
I have your revenue numbers.
Oh, you do? Oh, okay. But I just think that if we're gonna do this again, let's do it and be very thoughtful in how we do it so that people don't feel the city's responsible for everything and that, you know, the merchants are also participating in this process. That's That's all I got.
It's wonderful comments.
Oh, and if he has that, that'd be
Do you
good.
want me to yield to him for the revenue, or do you want to go first?
Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Alderman O'Brien. I just want to make sure I get this for the record because it was asked. So according to the fiscal note in the ordinance that was passed 022-008, the reduction in meter revenue was estimated to be between 30 and 45,000, and the reduction in parking enforcement revenue was estimated to be between 5 and 8,000. So that is, a good approximation of what you should, kind of think about year over year, give or take, for loss of revenue. And that was developed by the parking manager when this ordinance was contemplated. If I may respond to just a couple more comments, or I can leave my comments there and.
How do you feel about that, Alderman O'Brien?
Go ahead. So I guess I would just like to add that I really think that this body and the Board of Aldermen and the community really did a good job last spring with developing that compromise that you're talking about. That was a balanced approach. And now that we've gone through this season, I'd like to think, and all I can tell you is my observations, is that it was vastly improved from the previous years. I did not hear the complaints, and I saw the flow of Main Street improve immensely by making that change down by Peddler's Daughter, which is a group that really wants to participate, but unfortunately cannot. You did see Main Street flow much differently, and so I'd like to think we're on the right track, and that was actually brought about because of the hard work that all of you did.
Thank you for being so patient, Alderman O'Brien.
Oh, quite all right. As long as Director Cummings is still going to be here for me, okay. Myself personally, my personal opinion is, I don't care if we charge anything because it's one of those things that enhances the downtown. It is true, it goes to the person trying to make a profit, and I understand that. So therefore, I have no objections to the nominal fee that is, entertained at this particular time. So I think it's wise and everything else like that, because the whole thing is, I'm not gonna squeeze a nickel out of a kid carrying a baseball bat trying to go into a city park. We don't. And when we look at different things that we do, and outdoor dining has turned into one of those things that is a nicety that's in our community, well worth any type of cost. But the thing is that I want to bring up, now that Director Cummings is here, is I've heard a lot of conversation on loss of revenue, but maybe through the chair of this particular committee, we are annually losing revenue. Do we potentially get every dollar amount that we possibly can from every parking space? Okay, let's discuss what is a parking meter and what is a parking space. It is not there for the intention to make revenue. Never has been. What it is there is to increase a flush for businesses or anybody that is guarded or protected by the meter to have a timed limit so different people can come in. Thus, why we even tag employees who overstay their time at the meter. Bosses encourage them not to spend that because it takes a valuable parking space away from a potential customer who will, technically in a way, comes back to feed the employee's paycheck. But that's an issue I think that we need to look at. Right now, we meagerly pay our parking lot attendants to go out there and supervise the law. And I think if we address that in the future, as well as with the downtown dining and everything, and I'm talking the subsequent feeder streets that are off to the side, to help increase that flush would be actually an enhancement of better people coming in, because it would increase the time. Somebody spends about a couple hours at the restaurant, and then coming up with a particular time limit, which has kind of been etched like the horse scratching the ground, but hasn't really been documented, between 2 hours and 90 minutes. So maybe that also needs to be addressed as we look. And these are things that have been brought up and discussed before the Infrastructure Committee. And then the third thing is the parking spaces do not actually follow the property lines within the city, the actual potential storefront. So what is going to be done with that when they look at the spaces, okay? So you could have in theory, and I don't have my computer with me, but I think Director Cummings kind of knows, but I think the committee needs to be aware that, you know, if you go by what the physical frontage is, you're going to not really coincide 100% with the linear that is designated on the lines. We discovered that in infrastructure equally as well, too. So that needs to be looked at. It might chew up or eat up what could have been a potential space or two or something like that. So the thing is, I think we're on the right track. A nominal fee, if I can say, seems to be the right approach. I mean, it's not giving anything away. It will help defray some of the costs, I think, that for the particular project. And I think there's a lot more that this particular committee can do, and maybe have that discussion and looking at the parking department, which has sort of been somewhat of the unwanted sister in the group, you know, and to make them Cinderella for the day and maybe give them a viable force that they could probably actually help us with some parking revenue. And this coincides with what I'm concerned with, the structural integrity of 2 garages that we own. And we need to address that. I mean, it's nice to give money back to taxpayers and everything else like that, but woe be us if we let, you know, I guarantee you structurally, the Elm Street garage will still be there. It'll just be a sign out front, danger, you know what I mean? So the thing is, if it's allowed to remain untouched, right now, I feel comfortable in parking in it and there's no problem. But it's one of those things that needs some TLC from the city. So with all that, I think I said a mouthful to Director Cummings, and if the chair agrees, we'll see what his reply would be.
Do you have any responses to that, Director Cummings?
I think Alderman O'Brien is spot on with a lot of his comments. Ultimately, we do not collect all the revenue that we potentially could, either from meters or from enforcement, but nor should we. We're trying to regulate and change behavior. That's the fundamental principle behind the managing of our parking. We get the type of compliance that we're looking for, and I think the city has done a really good job being proactive in how we manage our public parking.
Before I move on to Alderman Clee, I just want to make one comment. I don't think it was much of the work that we did, but more so the city employees who came to those meetings, you, Director Hudson, Chief Engineer Hudson, and all the volunteers that were part of the committee.
And Director Sullivan, yeah, definitely.
Yes, Director Sullivan as well. We don't need to pat ourselves in the back. Alderman Clee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is to Director Cummings. In comment, I do remember when, I think it was Alderman Karen who had brought up in the past one about the cost and so on, and I appreciate you giving this, but I think at that time I had also asked if we noticed any increase in revenue from previous years on outside of Main Street. And I think that's kind of a handoff, and it may have been, I mean, I know we get less per parking and they're allowed to park there longer than they are on Main Street, because I know it's a different category, but I am curious as to whether or not we had any increase in those areas. Were there more increase in the garage use? Was there more increase in some of the side streets use? I can tell you that, yeah, I used the taxi stand area, and there are meters there, and I started noticing more and more people were using those and so on. I used some of the side streets, High Street and so on. So I was just curious, did we have any kind of a increase in those? It wouldn't have been as significant as if they had parked there because it costs us less, but did we see any of that?
So if I may, Mr. Chair. So there's a couple of things at play here that make it difficult to answer that question. And some of what I'm about to say is gonna be, anecdotal or just from my observation, because it's too early to quantify that, because we don't have good data. We weren't really charging for parking, in 2020 and 2021 when we were in the height of COVID. And so what you're referencing from an economic standpoint is the theory of displacement, and did we truly lose the revenue because we displaced the money that would have been spent on Main Street to one of the side streets? I think that's a very valid and fair point, that we probably saw the same amount of volume or possibly more, but we weren't charging the same amount of money. Main Street charges the most money. Zone 1, some of the areas you're referencing is Zone 2 or 3. We don't charge as much. What ultimately I can tell you is when we collect all the money at the end of the day, over the last couple of years, we weren't achieving our $728,000 threshold, which is, the tipping point before the Downtown Improvement Committee gets any excess funds. In 2021, we saw that number go down. I don't have the numbers yet for 22, but I believe it even got reduced even more. But nonetheless, we are still not over that 728 figure. So ultimately, I do think we saw a reduction, but that was a reduction maybe in collection of money, not necessarily a reduction of usage of parking spaces. I hope that was responsive. Would you like to follow up?
No, it was perfect. It was actually perfectly responsive. But I'm just glad to see that we probably didn't lose the volume, which tells me that people weren't avoiding the downtown area. And that's as much importance as it is the revenue. I know for some people it is the revenue. The other comment that I have is your opinion. I think it plays off on what I said earlier. If we should not keep the current flow plan that we have, as I stated that. Now, that could be an issue for someplace, I think it was brought up, the flight center. If they decided to join that, would we have to modify, or if just like Peddler's Daughter, they're out?
Are you talking about the loss of the barriers, like not putting the barriers out?
Well, no, right now there's no barriers that would allow the flight center, was that correct? Yeah, because it didn't start until after like the Wingate area. Right there, so the flight center didn't have the opportunity to do it, just like Peddlers didn't. Would we continue that, or would we have to modify the plan if they decided they wanted to be part of it?
So again, the ordinance that was adopted very clearly specified that those parking spaces would not be available for outdoor dining.
Okay, so that would not be that. And
Would you like to follow up?
Yes, it's not so much a follow-up, it's just more of a kind of a comment, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And I think that this comment probably falls within this committee. I want to add to what Alderman O'Brien had mentioned. And I know it's not part of this discussion, but in some respects it is. I really do want us to focus, I know it means money, but those 2 garages, they are important. And I have a lot of people who still use those garages, but they have a little anxiety because of lighting. And I know you guys are working on that lighting and so on. I've spoken to Ms. Stansfield and so on, but I do think that is really something important. Structure obviously is extraordinarily important, but lighting and people to feel safe in those, to be able to use them at night. And I personally have used the Elm Street quite a bit over this summer, so.
Director?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm sort of going to speak for Alderman O'Brien and letting the cat out of the bag, but I believe he is inviting me to the next Infrastructure Committee meeting to have this very specific presentation where we are going to discuss the garages and the deferred capital maintenance, and I'm going to outline a plan to hopefully address these issues. I will caution you all that it is not cheap. But we did spend money on having a third-party engineer report done. It's on the city's website. I would encourage you all to look at it. I'll send it around to you in advance of that meeting. We already did this presentation once, but that was about a year ago now, or maybe a little bit more or less. And now we're at a point where we're going to actually need to look to fund some of these improvements, and I'm going to be looking to talk to you about how you'd like to do that.
I have Alderman Tebow, then Alderman Clemmons, and Alderman Jettie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a couple things. I think with regard to revenue and parking, I think, I think we probably did a good job this year of pushing people to the side streets. I think one thing that I hear a complaint about quite often from constituents, and not just mine, but throughout the city, is making it easier to pay for parking. People want to pay, and for me personally, the things you have out there now, the app and stuff, that's great for me. I love that. I don't have to get out of my car. I can just pay and then go into wherever I'm going into. I don't have to go back to a meter or any of that stuff. So I think it's great, but not all people like that. And I wish there was a way that we could take money that they want to give us sometimes, because some people say they won't go downtown to park because they can't find a kiosk or they just don't understand how to park. So I think we should try to get as much parking revenue as we can. I think with the PAC opening up, we're gonna have a lot more people downtown. And that goes for the restaurants that are paying this 500 or whatever we're gonna decide. Well, there's gonna be a lot more people mingling downtown, so there's more chances that these people are gonna go into their restaurants or eat outside at their restaurants before a show. So they're certainly gonna have an opportunity to make some money, as will the parking, hopefully. I think there's a myth out there that we do this for a few restaurants in the city and we could care less about anything else. But we're not doing it necessarily for the restaurants, we're doing it for us, the city. What we do downtown and how the downtown flourishes is good for the city, the whole city, not just those few restaurants, but we need those restaurants to help, and the other businesses, not just the restaurants, the other businesses too. We need people downtown, we need to have people going down there. There was a time when people weren't going downtown. Before Mr. Director Cummings was here, way back when, there wasn't as many people going downtown. So I think we do need that, and I think not going overboard on charging is probably a good thing. So I know it's been brought up a couple times. Obviously, Peddler's Daughter can't do this, but there's a couple potential restaurants on the other side, even further up now. So they're not open yet, but I've seen that chicken and biscuit sign out there for, 6-7 months. And that other barbecue place or whatever, I know they have a little bit, probably have some room there on their, their bridge or whatever's back there. But when new restaurants open, say something closes and then another one opens. Say Joanne's Kitchen closed, and I know they're not closing, I don't want any rumors, but say another business comes in, we can offer that to them, correct? But we can't go up the street where where Riverside used to be.
Thank you. Joanne's Kitchen, yes, I believe you could through an amendment, and that is very much, I think, understood as part of the ordinance that was adopted last spring. I would caution you that I don't know if you could actually do some of the other restaurants that you referenced. In fact, I would think it may be problematic, and it is definitely not in the spirit of the ordinance that was passed by the Board of the Aldermen this past spring.
Follow up, yeah. And that's perfectly fine. I think as much as I would have loved to given it to the Peddler's Daughter, I think that opening up, that open right there, made a huge difference in the flow of traffic. And I think the committees did a great job. I'm going to say it, the aldermen or non-aldermen that were I thought they did a great job. I mean, they worked, I was on it, but we worked till very late in the night to hash out these things. And it was a hard thing to come up with. We took a lot of grief, some of us, for it. And I think it turned out as we expected, believe it or not. And things don't always turn out the way you expect them, but I think it did. And I think if the restaurants are willing to pay a nominal fee and we can get some of that money back, I'm for it.
Thank you for your comments. Alderman Clemens.
Thank you. So I have a question through you to Director Cummings. We had a conversation, I want to say in the summer at some point, about parking fees, and you said that was part of the parking study, and that would be coming out this fall. How close are we to that?
I knew this question was coming. I asked our parking manager specifically that question yesterday, and she's assured me it is going to be coming out before the end of this year. December is when it's on track to come, but of course I reminded her that she told me it was going to be out in June, and then she told me it was going to be out in August, and then she told me it was going to be out in September. So I told her I wasn't going to come back before you again until that study was done, and she believes that it should be wrapped up in the December timeframe.
Follow up?
Yeah, so part of our conversation that we had in regards to that was that the rates and what we charge and all of that on the, you know, at every space and that kind of thing is what's part of that. And so when we look at what we're gonna do, and I'm just gonna leave it at what we're going to do or what we end up doing, right? Because we don't know what's gonna come out of it. But hopefully it will raise revenue, and get us back over the $725,000 or $728,000 threshold that we have for the Downtown Improvement Committee. And that's the other reason why that legislation that I have in the Budget Committee is sitting there right now on the table, because we're waiting for this study to be done and see if that's the best approach, or if there's another way. Do we just leave the ordinance the way it is if we're gonna have enough revenue coming in? I say all of that because, and I believe that it's relevant to this conversation, because I know that there is a concern out there in regards to keeping the barriers. The Downtown Improvement Committee isn't getting any revenue, and that is absolutely probably true. It's probably because of the barriers. So I am the liaison to that committee. I am the author of that committee. It was my legislation that put it through. So trust me when I say that it's a concern that I have, and that I share, and it's something that is being worked on. So that committee went without any funding this year. They were the only group in the entire city that came forward and took a reduction in the budget. And I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that, you know, come next year, they get some kind of funding. And I think, you know, this discussion will be had. It's just in the works at the moment. So just wanted to kind of ease people's fears on that. And then on the flip side of that, I think, you know, charging a nominal fee, I think will help. Even if that money only goes towards the direct cause of putting out the barriers, it's still money that has to come from somewhere. We have to get that money somewhere to put those barriers in and out. So I think whether it goes to the Downtown Improvement Committee or if it goes directly to those costs, I think it doesn't really matter to me. I would almost prefer that it just goes directly to the cost of putting out the barriers. But in any way, that I just wanted to give people an update on the fees.
Great. I appreciate those comments, Alderman Clements. All right, Alderman Jettie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, you know, maybe I have a different perspective than what has been expressed so far. I mean, I'm encouraged to hear that the restaurant owners are, you know, acknowledge that there's a reason that they should pay something for this, and you know, I think they probably acknowledge that they're getting a big benefit from this, and that it only makes sense that they pay something. And you know, your comment that they said, you know, as long as it's reasonable, as long as it's based on, you know, research and, you know, some basis. So I look at, you know, other towns, other cities, you know, and in other cities, you know, they are approaching it, except for, I guess, Lowell, but other cities are approaching it a little differently. And I think you already, you know, brought this out, but Portsmouth, they charge $10 a square foot and a minimum of 2,000. So no matter how many square feet their dining area is, they charge a minimum of 2,000, but it's $10 a square foot. There was an article in one of the newspapers that talked about, and I'm assuming it's accurate, but I really don't know. It's a result of newspaper reporting. But I think someone would have denied it if it wasn't true. But there was an article in the paper, I think it was the Portsmouth Herald, about how the general manager of Surf, there's a picture of him outside the Surf restaurant in Portsmouth with a big smile on his face, talking about how the article was last April, I think, but how they were going to opt in on the sidewalk dining in Portsmouth, and that they were going to be paying $10 a square foot. They had 320 square feet, so that's $3,200 that they're paying, that Surf is paying in Portsmouth for sidewalk dining. Concord charges $3 a square foot, and this is the sidewalk dining. In addition, if you occupy a parking space in the street, they charge an additional $1,000 per parking space. Manchester charges $400 per parking space, but I think someone pointed it out. They have angled parking, so the amount of sidewalk space that matches with that parking spot is smaller than our spaces, because our spaces are parallel. So they charge $420 per space. In addition to that, they charge a $50 sidewalk encumbrance fee, and every business in Manchester, pays a business fee. They charge every business a fee just for doing business in the city of Manchester. So that makes me think that, when you look at these other places, and I know, the comment about Lowell not charging, but they require liability insurance. All these other cities also require liability insurance. Concord requires a $1 million, $2 million general liability insurance policy if you do the sidewalk dining or the parking space dining. So, and I'm not sure if we don't already do that. When a restaurant has outdoor dining.
Alderman, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm pretty sure we entered that last meeting. Am I correct, Director Cummings, that we require the restaurants to put the space in their liability insurance?
Correct.
Okay,
And so we're already doing that.
great.
So, I look at those other cities and I know that, I know the barriers, provided extra dining space, and that was in answer to the COVID crisis. They couldn't have indoor dining during, when COVID first started. So we allowed them to expand their outdoor dining possibilities in order to help them out. Now they're, they do have dining inside as well. So it's a different situation. I look at these businesses and they're business people. They're in this business to make money. That's what they're doing. And when we had the discussion about the barriers, there were people that came here to the meeting and expressed the concern. You've probably already gotten emails from people expressing the idea of, why are we providing this free outdoor dining space for these people, enabling them to make a profit? And not only are we not collecting anything from them, we're actually, paying money, to put out the barriers. And, so it's something that I know some people in town, kind of resent the fact that these restaurants are getting what they view as a free ride. There are a lot of restaurants in Nashua that are not on Main Street. They're providing their own parking lots. They're providing, their own outdoor dining facilities. They're not getting the benefit of any of this, and I understand the argument about downtown being, the center of the city, and it's important that we maintain downtown. But, I think we have to, look at a way of doing that, that makes sense, if you allow people to, if you allow these downtown businesses to continue to have free use of the street and the sidewalks, and we're putting up barriers, we're incurring the expense of the barriers, we're losing the parking revenue, well, that money's gotta be made up somehow. So who's making it up, People who never come downtown, people who don't go to the restaurants are participating in subsidizing that. And, it's something to bear in mind. It was mentioned that the parking revenue was never intended to provide revenue. Accurately, the main purpose of parking meters is to provide turnover. But what's that turnover for? Who is that benefiting? It's the downtown businesses. They're the ones that are benefiting from that parking and from that turnover. So I hope the committee doesn't, in a desire to support our downtown restaurants, I hope you're not, losing the bigger picture of fairness, not only to them, but to the rest of the city. And I think they understand, I think, the fact that, a downtown Nashua restaurant is willing to pay $3,200 in Portsmouth, they're probably willing to pay something similar here. It seems only fair. And, the argument that this, maybe the smaller restaurants can't afford it, well, they don't, it's a choice they make. If they want the outdoor dining, just like if they want to provide dining indoors, they have to pay rent. They have to pay somebody for that space. And so it only makes sense to me that if they're going to be occupying space on the city sidewalk and in the city street, that they also pay, something for that, which is going to enable them to make more money. And it's up to them to decide whether it's worth it or not. But so I hope when the committee reviews this, that they look at what other cities are doing, and we don't give things away. We don't leave money on the sidewalk, so to speak, or in the street. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Alderman Jettie. Before I move on to Director Sullivan, Alderman Clemens, and Alderman Lee.
Director
I'm
Cummings.
sorry. Where's my mind today? Is it?
You're interchangeable.
We absolutely are.
It's because I saw him over the weekend. He's in my mind. Do you have a proposal to us to consider as an alternative to what Director Cummings is suggesting?
I'm not prepared to make a proposal tonight, no.
But definitely, when we have the next meeting for sure, because one thing that I think it's very important, even though you're not on the committee, is to do the work at the committee, even if you're not on it, to come and offer changes, make changes here, so we don't get up to the full board. And next thing we know, we're bickering over a few $100s. But I definitely appreciate your comments, and we should continue that conversation if you agree. Director Cummings, sorry.
Yeah, no worries, thank you. I just wanted to clarify a point that was raised, because I don't want there to be any type of confusion. There seemed to be a suggestion or an alludement that maybe the city of Nashua was not charging for outdoor dining. And I would suggest it's a de minimis fee. It's by no means is it extravagant, but our public health, our DPW, our fire department, all charges the restaurants for the privilege of outdoor dining in the right of way. And those are separate fees that are assessed that, in the aggregate probably adds up to $50 to $100. I'm not by any stretch saying it's a big sum of money, but comparable to some of the numbers that were talked about in the other community. We did not charge that during COVID. During the height of the COVID pandemic, we suspended those permit fees. But now that we're back in regular course of business, and for instance, all this year, all last year, those fees were assessed onto the restaurants.
Alderman Clemens.
Thank you. So I just want to bring up a couple of points that were mentioned by my colleague and kind of put them in perspective. So Portsmouth, the numbers for what Portsmouth and Concord were charging were brought up, and they're significantly higher than what was proposed here tonight. There's a reason for that. The reason for that is because Portsmouth is a destination unlike any other in the state of New Hampshire. And it also has a very significant business community within its downtown. Because of the fact that it is a tourist destination and it is a business hub, you have a demand for restaurants that creates a lunch crowd on a Monday, for example. Now, I don't know if anybody here has gone downtown on a Monday, but try to find an open restaurant other than Martha's. You're gonna be hard pressed to find one. Bellissimo is open, I think, in the afternoon at some point. You go to Portsmouth, on the other hand, and almost every restaurant is open, and they're open all the time. And that's because there is a greater demand for that. Same thing is true in Concord. Concord has 400 state reps that go up there on a regular basis. There's all the staff that's in the State House. There's all of the government workers that work in various areas around downtown. There's lots of businesses as well. Has a lunch crowd. I'm sure that if I was to go up to Concord in the afternoon on a Monday, I could find a place to go have lunch outside as well. Same thing. So they're charging more. There's a reason for that. There's a higher demand. Here in Nashua, we don't have the higher demand. We have it at night, and we have it on the weekends and things like that, and that's where that demand comes in for the extra capacity is outside. So when you look at what we charge, yeah, it has to be market driven. I 100% agree with that. And so you look at the other two communities, you look at Lowell. I don't know why Lowell isn't charging. Maybe they're more benevolent than we are. But Manchester, on the other hand, with the $400 or so, that makes sense to me because, in my opinion, Nashua is a better destination than Manchester. So we should be charging a little bit more than Manchester. People want to be in downtown Nashua. I don't know that they necessarily want to be in downtown Manchester. People want to be in downtown Concord. People want to be in downtown Portsmouth. So I think that there's we have to be fair, and this is the other flip side of this too, regardless of what the other cities do. Nashua has always traditionally not charged, other than the fees that Director Cummings mentioned, we don't charge our businesses for the sidewalks, and we shouldn't charge them for the sidewalks. We just shouldn't. We're a pro-business community, and we should continue to be that way. We should support our small businesses. And starting to charge them to occupy space that since the 1990s they've had, all of a sudden charge them, I think is wrong. On the other hand, though, going into the street where the barriers are, I think charging them a nominal fee, $500 per space. So if you look at, for example, Martha's, they had what, 4 or 5 spaces? So let's say they had 4 spaces. That's $2,000 that they're gonna be spending, right, next year to offset that cost. And I think that that is a reasonable fee for them. I think that's a reasonable amount of money to ask our local businesses to pay. I think I think maybe we could argue a couple $100 here or there, maybe more. But I think you start getting above that threshold and you look at the market that Nashua's in, especially for somebody like Surf, and he says, well, I have this restaurant in Portsmouth, and yeah, that's worth the $3,500 or whatever it is that I'm paying. Because I have a constant flow of people. I have a 2-hour wait every night. That's not the case here. And so, you have to put that into perspective. And I think that, just as a bottom line, I think Nashua should always be a friendlier, better place to do business than the other communities. We should always be a little bit less. We should always do things that are more tailored towards our small business community. And that's not to say that they don't put any skin in the game, but it is to say that, we're gonna work with you. This is a good community to do business. This is a great place to set up shop. And we ask a reasonable fee from you, and please give it back to us, and it defers the cost of doing this. It's just my opinion.
Thank you for your comments. Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to make some comment about Manchester. Manchester does have head-in parking. And as such, and I did speak to my colleague, and I kind of verified that I was right on this. I had asked him way back when we were going through this, and they do charge, as Alderman Jettie had said, the 400 plus. They're allowed a maximum of 2 parking spaces. And because of the way their parking spaces are, they take less sidewalk space, but they go deeper in. So it's kind of about the same square footage as if they had 2 parking spaces side by side. It's just the direction of it. The difference also in Manchester is that they don't have to put up all the barriers that we have to because they have this head-in parking. So there's nobody that's really coming in and out of that area. That changes everything. It changes the entire game, which makes me feel like we can't quite compare it to what we're doing because by the directional and so on of everything like that. Now having said that, I do have a question, and I'm sure that Director Cummings probably cannot answer this question. The fees, well, I'm kind of throwing it at the last minute. I don't mean that you don't have the knowledge of it, but the fees that you mentioned that they get already for the sidewalk, do those departments get the fees that goes into their budget? Do you know that? Or does it go into the city's general fund, or does it go to the city's general fund?
Director Cummings.
So I would have to check what I'm about to say.
Right.
So with that caveat, typically the way it works is it's a fee for service is what it should be. So you should be assessing a reasonable fee for the production of the service you're getting. And typically when you collect that, you base your fee on, think of a building permit. You're building a permit, you apply for the application, it's a review of the plans, it may be a couple of inspections, and it's an issuance of a document. You, in theory, should think of and quantify the time that it takes you to provide that service, and that service is what you should be assessing. Look at me being an administrative services director.
You're interviewing now.
Yeah, right. But once that money is collected, it typically goes into the general fund as a local receipt.
Thank you. And so, obviously, we haven't determined, and I agree
Would you
that
like
we
to
really.
follow up?
I'm sorry, yes, I apologize. I do want to follow up.
Absolutely.
Both comment and question, I think. We should charge some kind of fee. There's no, I don't think any of us have said no to it. I think we've all kind of agreed to it. We're never going to recoup our monies. I think that one of the comments that Alderman Clemens had mentioned was that it should go to offset some of that cost. But whether we do it to offset that cost or to offset the loss of revenue to to make that $728, it's just a shell game. So I just don't want to see the Downtown Improvement Committee or anything like that lose any money. So, I mean, I guess I'm not on this committee, but just food for thought, whether you focus that money more towards the loss of revenue to make up that $728. I think I would feel more comfortable in that way. Again, just putting that out there for you all to think about that. And I appreciate what Alderman Jettie brought to us, because it's always good to see what other communities are doing, because the public is doing that. They're calling, they're checking, and they're doing, so we really should have that out on the table. But we should also distinguish, again, where Manchester is a little bit different than where we are. That parking in general means that they don't really have to put up the barriers that we have to put up, because they don't have to stop that in and out. So they're not gonna have all that cost. And just as a side note, and this was the thing that I want to verify, when they put their 400 plus fee in, they only got 4 restaurants that signed up for it. So, you know, they didn't want to pay that $900, because I think the original assessment was $450. I think they did change to $420, but they didn't want to pay that $900. Mostly because they didn't know how business was going to come back, whether or not they were going to have staff. There was all kinds of questions that came to them. So, and that's some of the business questions I think that we need to think of is, every summer is going to be different than the summer before. So it's hard to judge whether or not the restaurants are getting as many outdoor dining. There's the heat, there's the rain, there's the cold, there's whether or not they have enough staff to staff those tables, because that's additional tables from what they're having. I don't think it's fair to say that the Surf can afford $3,200, therefore the Gyro place should have to come up with the same amount of money. We do have to look at being a pro-business and so on. So I'm just putting all this out there, that when you make your decisions and deliberations, that you take all of that into consideration. Thank you.
And the same thing I said to Alderman Jettie, these comments are well welcomed, so we can hash this out before we infight at the full board. I got Alderman Tebow, then Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I work on Elm Street in Manchester, and I don't want to go to Manchester. So, no offense to Manchester. I went to Lowell not too long ago, and their downtown was, it looked like an abandoned building. So I can see why they charge nothing, because they have to try to find a way to build that city back up. It's a roller coaster city. I've been there where, wow, Lowell's back, this is great. And then, a couple years down the road, it's a mess. And whatever they're doing, it's not working. It's a roller coaster. So, the goal here, and I think, directors Cummings and Sullivan have done a good job of trying to keep us that way, where we're not going down that roller coaster, we're staying here. And I think we have to be careful, not to outcharge people out of downtown. To Alderman Jettie's point, he's not gonna be the only one coming to us at the Board of Aldermen and saying that, we should charge higher. There's some thought out there in the world that we should be charging higher so we can get rid of downtown dining. But there's also people that truly believe, and I think Alderman Jettie's this way, that we should be charging more. And that's, that's okay too. But we have to figure out when we all get together, how, what we're gonna vote for and what we're not gonna vote for. And, the myth that, we don't do it for other restaurants, so why do we do it for downtown? Well, we want businesses downtown, and downtown's a hard place to fill, because you don't get a giant parking lot usually, right, depending on where you are. You're not sure if people are gonna come downtown or not, depending on what your business is. Some people move there and go, oh my God, no one comes to me, and they move, they get out of there, right? So it's not the easiest place sometimes for certain businesses to go, and that can be restaurants too. You're not gonna open an Applebee's on Main Street. But the Applebee's parking lot off Exit 8, they have a huge area. So they can do whatever they want. They have that luxury, where these restaurants do not have the luxury. So I think that's why we try to help them out, other than the fact that we want people to go down to Main Street. It's not trying to be unfair to other restaurants in the city. If there was some place in the city that had kind of a restrictive area, and they came to us and said, hey, can we do something? What do you think about this? I think we'd look at it, we entertain it. I don't know if we'd do something, but I think I would certainly listen to the restaurant or the business. And I think that's what Main Street's crowded. You know, you got a block there, so a lot of it's over 100 years old, some of it, right? Some of the stuff that's still standing. And you have to kind of make it work. And I think we do a great job. It's been going, you know, and Alderman Clemens can tell you, there was a point where it started to revitalize, and it's pretty much stayed that way, and it keeps going. We got to keep evolving, and hopefully the National Performing Center of the Arts will do that as well. But you know, I mean, if someone came to me and said, let's do 600, I'd probably vote for that too, you know, or 550. It doesn't have to be 500, but I can't see voting 3,000, because then you are penalizing the smaller restaurant for that. And Surf will be like, here you go, if they want to even do it. But all the rest of the restaurants, San Francisco Kitchen, they're not going to do that. And then we just basically don't have barriers, and we don't have outdoor dining, and that's not what most of us want. So that's my comments.
Thank you so much. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. I just want to start off with a little fish story. You got to remember, one of the smallest fishes out there is the piranha in the Amazon, and it can strip a cow, but it does it one bite at a time, not in one big gulp. I want you to shadow this committee. You're in your infancy on this particular matter. Whereas in infrastructure, we discussed the barriers. And did we get it right out of the starting gate? The answer is no. I'll be the first one to admit it. But when we look here now and talking, it sounds like we've already solved it. We're in unison. There's been a lot of conversations, but we're all repeating the same thing. I haven't heard any really true objections on charging something. But I've heard also too, and may I caution, keep in mind that things are fluid and things can change. If you came out with too high a price, that's sticker shock to the recipient. May cause them not to want to get involved. If we go slowly, and I'm not saying to raise the rate every single year, but to address it, revisit it. It could be one of the annual things that this particular committee needs to do. And maybe determine if the rate change is needed or what the current rate is adequate enough. And again, like the little good piranha, doing things at one bite at a time and making a total improvement on this thing. I mean, when I started the fire department, I realized fires in California are a lot different than the forest fires in New Hampshire, you know, but they're both fires. So I don't look too much over the fence into the other fellow's yard. We can't. We have to see what fits within our particular community, what our community really truly expects. You can compare, but then again too, if you too much mirror other communities, there's other mitigating factors that are underneath the bed sheet that you just really don't see. You know, so therefore, you gotta take that into account. So the thing is, let's look at what's best for Nashua. So I'll ask a rhetorical question. Unless there's objection, it sounds like we're all in favor of moving forward with some sort of fee. So to keep the discussion, or let's keep the eye on the prize. What's next?
Director Cummings.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Alderman O'Brien teed this up nicely, because I was going to just ask the committee that if I'm hearing it correctly, I would ask, are you charging me to try to get draft legislation together to be filed at your next Board of Aldermen meeting for a first reading, with the understanding that that draft legislation would be written in a way for $500 per space for the season. You can only use the parking spaces that you've paid for. Is that?
Before I turn over to Alderman Clemmons for a question, I think I want to see it slightly higher. Only, and here's my reasoning. I want to get to at least the low point of the $30,000 to $45,000 to replace one segment of loss. I do think that if we get to the parking revenue replacement, that meals tax, whatever, is being made up for the cost of placing the barriers, and it's a good swap. But I think if we come in just under that 30, you're going to get a lot of pushback from others that say we need to have some costs completely covered. Alderman Clemmons.
If I might suggest, what I would suggest is that we do the legislation, have the legislation come in with the $500 fee, and then with that, have some cost estimates. So, in other words, what is the $500 based on the map that we have now, and assuming that everybody participates, what would be the revenue that would be raised if it was $500, and then maybe based on that math, we could get some other assumptions, 600, 700, whatever, and then debate that at the committee. We can always amend the legislation at that time, but for expediency purposes, I would say, you know, let's at least draft something.
Great.
Get it on the table, right? Get it before us, and then we can always amend it. Because there are a few nuances too that I want to make sure that are in that legislation, such as, I don't know, I'm kind of a visual person. So you have, let's say somebody's just buying one space for the sake of it, and this is the space. These two barriers right here are in other spaces, but we're only charging them this one.
That's right.
You know, I don't know how, I
Yeah.
couldn't, other than doing a visual, I couldn't make an example of that. But those are the kind of small things that we are, in addition, that we want to make sure the legislation covers, and you know, this is a lot, I think there's gonna be a lot of discussion. So it'd be my recommendation that we just move forward with the 500 for now, and then we can debate amongst ourselves once it's here, what is a better, maybe a better plan or a different plan.
Would you want to turn that into a motion?
Sure, I would move that,
And then we can discuss it.
that we have Director Cummings draft the legislation for $500 a space, and that, but give us estimates at, I don't know, let's say $600 and $700. And then, and I would be happy to sponsor that legislation as well.
Discussion. Alderman Karen, I'm sorry, I
Yes,
looked
thank
at
you.
you, but I didn't realize I didn't acknowledge you.
Thank you. So I agree with you that we should start somewhere, but I think I'd like in that legislation that this is for 1 year, for, you know, whatever the season is, so that you have, as Alderman O'Brien says, that gives the committee a chance to review it every year, and you're also not binding future boards, you know, a 5-year plan, and if you want to make changes, as Alderman Jettie, to increase the cost, you can do that down the line. But I think I think that should be a yearly thing that the committee should really look at, because I think it's important. The economy changes, things happen. You might want to leave it the same. Maybe you need to lower it for a year because of things happening. And I think some of the other discussion, I do have some concerns about where the revenue money would go to. So, but I think that's something that could be brought up in committee when the legislation comes. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman,
Actually, I'll defer to Alderman Tebow first, and then I'll go next.
I'm
These
sorry,
are
I
members.
need to clarify. Were you offering an amendment to the motion?
Yes, or if,
I'll amend my motion to,
yeah,
Okay, so I got it then. Thank you.
thank you.
further discussion, Alderman Tebow.
Yeah, so,
Who's also
thank
clerking
you.
at the same time.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a question to Director Cummings through the chair. So this is you're gonna draft up the legislation, it's gonna come back to the committee. Is there any kind of timeline on this, or, I mean, we got plenty of time leading up to next spring, or do we need a time where we need to have something on the books for all the machinations of City Hall to work,
Oh,
collecting the money and all that stuff?
That's a loaded question.
Just because I want to make sure we're being timely on this over the next couple of meetings, and
So
this could go on
long as you
forever.
act now, you still have lots of time. I would caution you that if you don't act and you get into the first of the year and you're in January, February timeframe, you're gonna be too late. But
Yeah.
so long as you continue and you work at it between now and the end of the year, you should have plenty of time.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I defer to Alderman Karen's comments about the 1 year. I was actually going to suggest every 2 years, just so that they could budget for it, but you're absolutely right, we don't want to bind another board. So I appreciated that you spoke in that manner, and that would do better. I was just thinking they needed a budget. But my concerns are more for what you had said, Chairman Moran, and that is that we look at it to cover the costs. We're gonna go in this setting fees, not knowing who's going to be in that. So, you know, it could only be 2 that could afford this. I have no idea who could or couldn't afford this $500. But if you put it up to $600 or $700, you may have just eked out someone, and we are still gonna have to have the barriers. So it's still gonna cost us the same, and we could push someone out that may have done it. So I think we shouldn't necessarily look at covering the cost, but how can we get the most participation? The barriers are still probably going to be there. So let's not push anybody out in our trying to keep the naysayers happy with that we're covering all the costs. I just, again, want to just put that out there for food for thought. We don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot in that respect. And to Alderman, sorry, I didn't mean to demote you, to Director Cummings, if I
Yes,
may,
of
sir.
course.
Okay, my question is, if we generally just right now kind of guesstimated the $500, would you be able to speak to those that have participated so far, to ask them if they would consider it under that fee? Or maybe you went into them saying, they're putting in this, but I think they're thinking about 700, start them with 700, work it down. Would you be able to speak to them to kind of get a more feeling, so that when this board does finally get this, they know approximately who may or may not? I know we're not getting them to sign a contract, but would that be possible?
If I may, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I would absolutely, in between now and when this got referred to committee, feel like it would be my obligation to pound the pavement a little bit, do the due diligence, and make some sort of report back to you. Obviously, don't hold me to it,
Right.
but I feel like I could give you some sort of guidance as to their level of participation based off of $500, and you can go from there.
And they can always come here too and speak to us as members of the public.
And we encourage them all to do that, actually.
And just to Alderman Clee, I'm not looking for the full cost. It's like one or the other. I mean, the full cost is like around 100,000. That would,
Right.
with the putting the barriers out and the loss of potential revenue from the. So I'm looking for something to be fully covered. I don't know how else to say it, but
Don't know if it'll happen.
one or the other to be fully covered if possible. But that's what we'll hammer out through further discussion. You know, it's great to want things. Doesn't mean it'll happen.
May I respond?
Yes, of course.
And I don't blame, I truly don't blame you, and I think it's a goal to try to achieve. I just don't want it to become the criteria, because we won't necessarily be able to do even one aspect of it. We may, if we only got 4 people to do it, we may not even be able to get the 30,000. So I think it's a good goal, and it's always something important to set a goal. I just don't want to put it out in the public that this is what we're doing it for. Things tend to get the life of their own on Facebook and so on. So that's the only reason why I made that comment. So, but I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, can
I
I?
want to make one statement. As a savvy business owner too, though, I would go around and say, oh, well, if I say I'll pull out, maybe they will keep it at $500. Director Cummings.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Chair, and to the point, I kind of got the sense of which ones were doing that to me and which ones weren't, and I think that there are some sophisticated business owners who hedged a little bit. I think the approach you are taking is a great approach. I recommend it. I think it's a good incremental step, and you can revisit this every year and assess the situation and go forward. One cautionary note, and it goes along with what Alderman Cleve was just talking about, and you're gonna hear me say this tomorrow night, so I'm giving you a little bit of a preview, but as a best practice, I would recommend that you have this money for paying for the barriers set aside up front and have it available as a source of funds, and yes, collect the money to reimburse yourself. I would not want anyone to think that you could forego some of this money that may be setting aside through the escrow process in the anticipation that you're collecting this money, because we need to contract with a business, a third-party business, that is not going to do business with us unless we have the money available to pay for the barriers. So I just want to put that out there so you recognize that, and yes, we should strive for a goal to try to cover costs if that's your so desire.
Great point. Any further discussion on the motion? All right, I'm gonna call a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, Director Sullivan, you have your direction.
Cummings.
Director Cummings.
I take
I
that
am
as a
so
compliment.
sorry.
No, I take that as a compliment, absolutely. Thank
It's
you.
because I've been talking to him about rezoning for
Or
months
Matt.
straight.
Mr. Chair, may I ask
Yes.
one question?
Go ahead.
I heard Alderman Clemmons affirmatively saying he'd be a sponsor. If there's anyone else who wishes to be a sponsor, I get to kind of be like President Bushai for a moment. I see Moran, I see Clee, I see O'Brien, I see Tebow. Awesome, thank you.
Great. All right, let's move on. Communications,
None.
unfinished business,
There is none.
petitions,
There is none.
new business resolutions,
There is none.
new business ordinances,
There is none.
table in committee,
Nothing.
general discussion.
No,
Oh.
Are you going to do Alderman comments?
I will, yeah. I just want to say, as far as general discussion, I appreciate everyone's feedback and discussion tonight. I think everyone had very solid ideas, whether we agree with each other or not on how it comes. But obviously, you all did your homework too on this. And I appreciate when members who aren't members of the committee come here and talk about how their perspectives are, so we can really hash this out. So we don't have what happened at last BOE meeting over the budget surplus. So I think it's great, and I appreciate, special appreciation to Alderman Jettie and Alderman Clee for coming tonight. All right, public comment. Anyone from the public wish to comment? All right, remarks by the Alderman. We'll go around this way, Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to make one comment, and I'm almost 100% positive that Alderman Clee is going to mention it too, but I'm going to head her off a little bit. I got to go to Riverfest on Saturday, but I only could go for about 45 minutes. I had to go coach a baseball game over in Merrimack. Yes, we won. First win. But you know, what I saw was great. I saw a lot of the people in this chamber. I saw a lot of other people in the city, and I thought looked like it was going to be a great event. She'll tell us, I'm sure, all about it when we get around to her. But I wanted to thank her and Alderman Lopez, because they both did a lot of work to get it ready. And I'm sure I saw Alderwoman Timmons there. She looked like she was doing some work too, smoothing out the crowd and stuff. So I just want to thank them for that. And it was a great time, and I wish I could have stayed a lot longer than that, but thank you.
Alderman Karen, Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. I just appreciate everybody coming this evening. I think this is a great conversation, and like you said, Mr. Chairman, if we may not all agree on every single point, but I think that, you know, good discussion was had. This is, and I agree with you, this is the place to have that discussion so that when it gets to the full board, you know, we either vote it up or down. You know, it's okay to have amendments every now and then at the full board of aldermen, when something arises that, you know, comes out of left field or something like that, but this is really the better place for it, so, thank you.
Alderman Jettie, anything? No? Alderman Clee.
Yes, Alderman Tebow was was absolutely correct. I do want to talk about Riverfest. But before I do that, I want to say that the Duck Derby went really well. And we had, the heavens were looking out for us because we had the most perfect weather for both events. One was on one side of the river, one was on the other side of the river. I'm actually wearing the Nashville t-shirt that was part of the event. It was phenomenal. We had better than I ever thought it could be. We had a few issues with people who had not moved their cars, but we have a plan for that next year. Next year, we're hoping to have it in June, which would be the anniversary of both when Nashua and Nashville split up, as well as when they kind of got together and the city became a city. So we're looking at around, the last weekend is what I would prefer, but I believe that'll probably be the Pride weekend. So we don't want to interfere with either one. So we'll probably have it the weekend before, unless Alderman Lopez's block party is that. We may rename it to call it a block party because it really was. We got neighbors from all over, and it was wonderful. It didn't matter where you lived in the city. We had people as far as Mason, New Hampshire came. They probably came for the Duck Fest and just came over to our little one, as well as Shirley, Mass. But they did come to our event. We had people who won raffles. We had Alderman Moran was one of them. Alderman Timmons claimed it was fixed because she didn't win anything, but it was a really, really good time. I was blown away. It was the day after my surgery, so I was walking around with my cane and my hobbled foot, but it was amazing. The Alderman Lopez joined in on the pepper eating contest, and originally he was going to be the only one, and suddenly we had, I think, like 6 or 7 people that stepped up. It was quite interesting to watch these people eating raw jalapeno peppers. Just the smell of it was making my eyes water, but you'll hear me repeat this again tomorrow because it bears saying, and I want as many people to hear about how wonderful it was to have my community come out as well as the rest of the city. And I want to thank the Duck Derby for sharing their day with us. The Rotary was incredible when I told them that it was going to be the same day, and we were hoping to feed off them as well as to feed them. And they were magnanimous, so kudos to the Rotary Club, and I believe their derby was successful too. They were much bigger than us. They had the beer tent and so on, but my husband ran over to the beer tent with the dogs and left me back. So thank you to everybody who came.
Any comments, Alderman O'Brien? Yes, I went to Riverfest and I won a basket. It was great. I also went over to the Rotary's Duck Derby, brought my kids. Free ice cream at the Riverfest, by the way.
Yes.
I was
Hazy ice cream.
very excited for that. And I saw many, I saw Alderman Tebow, I saw Director Sullivan, not Director Cummings. Julian was there, the city clerk Dan was there, and I saw Senator Rosenwald was also there.
Yes, she was there.
It was a very good turnout by local leaders and city officials, plus the community, which was wonderful. So congratulations on your first one. It was amazing.
Can I make one more comment?
Sure.
Thank you. Director Cummings was coming, but he had a babysitting issue. And I got a message going, do you know how hard it was for me to write this message? But I have babysitting and I said family first. So he was on his way. And I want to say the city clerk was there and registered new voters too. So it worked out. We had from city to NAACP to people who made crystals to everything. It was just wonderful.
And I'm sure Director Cummings was there in spirit.
Yes.
And then the Rotary put on a great event as well. My middle child won the duck decorating contest put on by Positive Street Art, which was wonderful as well. So we got to walk up and around and then walk back to enjoy these two festivals. It was great. All right, I have no other comments. Alderman O'Brien, do you have a motion?
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
All right, that is in order. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And we are adjourned at 8:34 p.m.